You can see here on my desktop I have the installations directory, and these are, again, the installations that I've already completed: the Reform server, Reform Most, and Reform Email. And we'll go into a little bit more on what each of those provide for the functionality. And just to explain where those are located, you can download any of these installations at our website at fabsoft.com if you view the trial download section. Each of these installations is available for trial. Here you can see the Reform base server, PrintToMe, Most, and the email plugin. Now to continue, because I already have the core software installed, the next step for me is to install the PrintToMe installation. So I'm going to just simply double click on the file. And the installation for PrintToMe is fairly straightforward. Now, the PrintToMe mobile software, as I said earlier, allows a user to send various documents to a specific email address so that they can be added to their own print queue. And the typical document types that are supported are TIFF images, JPEG images, and PDF documents. To kind of expand on that ability, we also provide a way to print Word documents, Excel documents, and PowerPoint slideshows. And to provide that ability, we'll be installing OpenOffice. OpenOffice is essentially a Word document or a document application similar to Microsoft Office. So once we install PrintToMe, we'll be running through the OpenOffice installation as well. Here we can see PrintToMe has just completed. And I'm also going to install OpenOffice now. Again, the installation should be fairly straightforward. We'll be using the default settings and just a typical installation. Now, while this is installing, I'm just going to explain two different scenarios that PrintToMe-Mobile addresses. Now, when PrintToMe-Mobile is monitoring an inbox for any kind of incoming attachments to add to a user's queue, there's two scenarios that are available. The first scenario is if a user that's within the environment or part of the LDAP or Active Directory environment within a client's system, if they were to send an email to this inbox, PrintToMe-Mobile will automatically detect their email address, find their username and account, and will provide the user with their print job automatically. The user doesn't need to go looking for the attachment or any kind of searching or PIN codes or anything along those lines, because the software already knows that the attachment came from an email address for a specific user in the environment. The other scenario is, let's say there's a contractor work that needs to print a document in your environment. If an email comes from an external email address, let's say Gmail or Hotmail or any other account that doesn't belong on your network, what will happen is it will print the document and create a temporary user for that person. It'll then respond to that email with a PIN code that will allow the contractor or whoever this is to log into Most and retrieve only their print jobs. Now, that PIN code will remain in the system until about 7 days or so when it can be removed, or if the user continues to print, it'll stay in there for them to reuse that same PIN code repeatedly. Okay, so here we can see the OpenOffice installation has completed. Now, the next thing I want to do is configure PrintToMe-Mobile. So I'm going to go to the Start menu, and we can see the shortcut is actually already in the Start menu here for us, but in case it's not, the same shortcut can be found under the Reform PDC software and under PrintToMe. You'll see the shortcut for PrintToMe-Mobile configuration. And here we can configure the inbox that will be monitored for email attachments. You can see it's asking for IMAP information, but we also support Exchange connections as well. Just for easeability or simplicity, I'll be using a Gmail account for this configuration because it'll allow anybody to configure it similarly. So here I'm going to enter the Gmail IMAP information. And you can see here the username or email address that I'll be using is mobile.printtome@gmail.com. And once I've entered the information, I can test the IMAP settings. Here we can see it's successful, and there's currently 0 messages waiting to be processed. Similarly, I can set up the outbound email as well, and again, we'll be using Gmail. The outbound email is primarily used for sending PIN codes back to the external users. As I explained earlier, if a user is not part of the network, they will receive a PIN code with their credentials to log into Most. Here again, I'll test the settings, and on the outbound email, it will actually send a test email to itself. Here we can see it was successful, and if we return back to the inbound email settings and test those again, we should see the messages waiting to process has now increased to 1, just to verify that it was successful. The next settings that we have available are LDAP or Active Directory settings. In most cases, these can be left as their default. PrintToMe-Mobile is designed to read the same settings from most that are being used for LDAP. In very rare occasions would you need to modify these. The last screen here is Other, and this allows us to control which print driver the incoming email attachments are printed to. The PrintToMe driver should be selected by default, and we're going to leave that as the selected printer name. The IMAP polling interval essentially specifies how often to check that inbox for incoming document, and by default we specify 5 seconds. The last setting here that we'll be looking at is the OpenOffice configuration. Because we did install OpenOffice on this server, we'll be able to print Word documents, Excel documents, and PowerPoint slides through PrintToMe-Mobile. For that to be possible, we need to indicate where the OpenOffice software has been installed. So I'm just going to browse for the software. It's typically under Program Files, openoffice.org, and you'll see a program folder here as well containing the application. Now that I have the configuration done, I can click the OK button in the bottom right corner to save all of my changes. It'll ask me if I want to start the service. At this point, I'm going to select No, and I'll explain why in a moment as we get to configuring the software further. One side note I wanted to make about Gmail was that by default, it doesn't permit IMAP connections. If you are planning on using Gmail to demonstrate or to test with PrintToMe-Mobile, we need to simply turn on the IMAP ability. And to do that, I'm just going to log into the account. And under Settings, we can see the forwarding and POP/IMAP settings, and I've already enabled IMAP for this account. By default, if you create a new account, this will be disabled, so it's always good to keep this in mind if your inbound connection fails on the PrintToMe-Mobile settings. Next, we want to configure the software to run under a specified service account. The reason we do this is to ensure that the application has the required permissions and security that is needed to run properly. To do that, we're going to use the Reform Health Monitor. And we can find that in the Start menu under Reform and Monitoring, and you'll see the Health Monitor shortcut there. And the reason we use the Health Monitor is it's just a simple way of managing the services related to Reform. It'll allow us to stop, start, or configure any of the services that are needed. Once it's open, I'm going to click on the Modify Service Settings button on the screen, and here you can see the list of services related to Reform. You'll notice that the email, the Most, and the basic Reform software has already been configured with my desired service account. However, the new software, such as PrintTome and PrintTome-Mobile, are still running as the default network service account, which may not have the required permissions. To correct this, I'm going to click on the option Change All Service Accounts. Now, this will affect the services that I've already configured, but for general purposes, this will accomplish what we're hoping to complete. So I've entered the credentials. It's now setting the correct credentials for all of the services, and it'll ask if I'd like to restart them now. Because a restart is necessary for the account to take effect, I'm going to select the option Yes. Now we can see all of the service accounts have been configured, and the last thing I'd like to do here is to ensure that PrintToMe-Mobile starts up automatically with the server. You'll notice if I look at the Startup Mode section of the Health Monitor, the PrintToMe-Mobile service is running manually, meaning to start the application, somebody would manually have clicked the Run button. Because we have configured the software, I'm going to use the option down in the bottom right corner to set the service startup to automatic. And this will help ensure that the software is always running even after a server restarts. We can now see it's been updated to auto. Now that the services are configured and running properly, I can exit the Health Monitor application. The next step I need to complete to implement PrintTome and PrintTome-Mobile is to add PrintTome as an available workflow in the Most application. Most allows users to log into the MFP and essentially authenticate the user, as well as grant them access to specific workflow. At the moment, the default installation of most only grants the user access to scanning to their home folder and scan to email. Because we've now installed PrintToMe, we can add that ability as well. To do that, I'm going to go back to the Start menu again, and under Reform, PrintToMe, we'll now see the option to install the PrintToMe screens to the Most Designer. Clicking that will open the Most Designer, where some configuration changes can be made, and the first thing it will prompt is if I'd like to import PrintToMe into Most. I'm going to select the Yes option, and now we can see PrintToMe is added as a Most collection. The next step is to configure it so that users actually have access to this workflow. To do that, in the Data menu, I'm going to select the users and groups. Here we can see the user demo and two groups, database and domain users. Today we'll be focusing on the database and domain users. Starting with database, I'm going to give that account or group access to the PrintToMe workflow. The database group consists of the temporary users that I mentioned earlier. So if somebody outside of our network was to send an email to mobile.printtome@gmail.com, when PrintToMe-Mobile attempts to locate their domain account, it won't find it, and it will create a temporary user and PIN code for them to log in with. That user would fall under the database group. The domain users group, however, essentially encompasses all of the users on our domain, so we'll also grant them access to the PrintToMe workflow as well. And I'm going to remove the admin screens just to simplify the interface. I moved PrintToMe up to the first or second collection here so that it's the first workflow we see when we log in on the MFP. Now that I've made the required changes, I'm going to save all of them, and we can now close the Most Designer. Now, looking at how the PrintToMe software is installed, we can see that the first thing we'll notice, a PrintToMe driver is created on the server. So if I go back into the Start menu under Devices and Printers, we'll see a PrintToMe driver installed on the server, and viewing the printer properties, we'll be able to make the print driver accessible to workstations by sharing it out, just as you would any normal printer. And we can see the installation has already shared it with the name PrintToMe. The print driver can also be installed on print servers. This helps with redundancy and, again, distribution of printers. Just to demonstrate the basic workflow for PrintToMe, I'm going to simply print a document to the PrintToMe driver. Now I'm doing this just as I would any normal printer or any user would typically do. Now what I'd like to do is if I was to go to an MFP and release the document, I would see that in my queue.